So how does our memory actually work? I mean, really work. It's one of the biggest, most fascinating questions in psychology. To get a handle on it, we're going to dive into one of the most influential blueprints for the mind ever created, the Multistore model.
You know the feeling, right? You look up a number, you're repeating it to yourself. Okay, I got it. You dial it, and boom, 5 minutes later, it's just gone, vanished. But you can probably remember your childhood home address without even trying. What is the deal with that? That exact puzzle is what we're going to unpack today.
All right, so the human mind is, let's be honest, ridiculously complex. So to even begin to understand a process like memory, psychologists can't just guess. They build models. And you can think of these models like architectural blueprints for the mind, a way to map out how all the different parts might connect and work together. Now, back in the day, this was a huge shift in thinking. For a long time, the mind was basically treated like this mysterious black box. You knew stuff went in and behavior came out, but you couldn't really study what happened in between. Then, computers came along and provided this amazing new metaphor. What if the mind is kind of like an information processor?
This simple idea is actually incredibly powerful. Just like a computer, our minds take in information from the world. That's the input. Then we do something with it, right? We organize it, we store it, we try to make sense of it. That's the process. And finally, we produce some kind of result, like remembering a fact or kicking a ball. That's the output. This whole input, process, output idea gave psychologists a real scientific way to start studying our mental world.
So, using this brand new information processing approach, two psychologists, Richard Atkinson and Robert Shiffrin, came up with their now famous multi-store model of memory all the way back in 1968. And this diagram right here, this is their core idea in a nutshell. The model basically suggests that information goes on a journey through 3 separate memory stores or boxes. It all starts with stuff from the environment hitting our sensory memory. If and only if we pay attention, that info moves to our short-term memory. And then, with a little bit of work, it can finally make the leap to long-term memory for more permanent storage. See that? It's like a one-way street with a couple of really important checkpoints. So that first stop on the journey is sensory memory. Honestly, this isn't even what we normally think of as memory. It's more like an immediate echo chamber. It holds an exact, perfect copy of what you just saw, heard, or felt. The flash of a car driving by, the sound of a door slamming. But only for a tiny fraction of a second. Almost all of it just fades away instantly, unless we consciously decide to pay attention to it. Okay, now this is where the model gets really, really interesting. If you pay attention, information lands in your short-term memory, or STM. Think of this as your brain's active workspace, or maybe a mental sticky note. But it's super limited. It can only hold about 7 things at a time and only for about 18 to 30 seconds. In total contrast, you have long-term memory, or LTM. This isn't a sticky note. It's a massive warehouse with a potentially unlimited capacity where memories can last for your entire life. So the big question is, how does information get from that tiny, temporary sticky note into the giant, permanent warehouse? Well, according to the model, the secret ingredient is rehearsal. Remember that phone number you were repeating over and over? That's what they call maintenance rehearsal. You're literally keeping the information alive in your short-term store, and if you do it enough, you give it a chance to get filed away in the long-term store. Of course, a model is just a nice idea on paper, right? The real question is, does it actually predict how our memory behaves in the real world? So how in the world did psychologists find evidence that these separate boxes for short-term and long-term memory actually exist? Well, they used a really clever kind of experiment, famously done by 2 guys named Glanzer and Kunitz in 1966. The setup is pretty simple. Imagine you're in the study. You're shown a list of words, one after the other. Then, to kind of wipe your mental slate clean, you're asked to do a quick distraction task, like counting backwards from 100 for 30 seconds. Finally, you get a blank piece of paper and are told, okay, write down all the words you can remember. And here's the cool part. When you plot the results of thousands of people doing this, you almost always get this very distinct U-shaped curve. People are fantastic at remembering words from the beginning of the list, and they're also great at remembering words from the very end of the list. But the ones in the middle, they're mostly forgotten. This consistent pattern is called the serial position effect. And this U-shape is what provides such beautiful evidence for the 2 separate memory stores. The reason you remember the first few words, what's called the primacy effect, is because you had enough time to rehearse them over and over and they made it into your long-term memory.
The reason you remember the last few words, the recency effect, is because they're still fresh. They're literally still rattling around in your short-term memory. And those poor words in the middle, they got bumped out of short-term memory before they had a chance to make it to long-term. It's just perfect evidence for two distinct systems.
And the evidence isn't just from these lab studies. Some of the most powerful support came from tragic, real-world cases. The most famous is a patient known as HM. He had brain surgery to treat severe epilepsy, but it unfortunately damaged his ability to form new long-term memories. He could meet someone, have a perfectly normal conversation, but 30 seconds later, he'd have no memory of ever meeting them. And yet his short-term memory was totally fine. This heartbreaking situation strongly suggested that short-term and long-term memory are not only separate systems, but they're probably located in different parts of the brain.
Okay, so it's pretty clear this model isn't just some random idea. It's backed up by some really solid evidence. But in science, progress means you have to question everything. And even the best, most influential models have their limits. The Multistore model is definitely no exception. First, let's give credit where it's due. The strengths of this model are huge. Its beautiful simplicity was its power. It was a revolutionary first real attempt to map out the process of memory. It gave researchers a clear, testable framework that inspired literally decades of new research. You could say that without this foundational model, our understanding of memory just wouldn't be where it is today.
But, and this is a big but, its simplicity is also its biggest weakness. We now know that both short-term and long-term memory are not just single, simple boxes. For example, STM is much more active, it's more of a working memory, and LTM is split into different kinds of memory, like memory for facts versus memory for skills, like how to ride a bike. The model also puts way too much emphasis on rote repetition. I mean, think about it. You don't rehearse a shocking or a really emotional memory over and over, right? It's often burned into your brain instantly.
So if the model is too simple and has flaws, you might be wondering, was it all just a waste of time? And the answer is absolutely not. Which brings us to the really big picture here. Why models like this matter so much in the first place.
Here's the key takeaway. The whole point of a scientific model isn't to be a perfect, 100% accurate photograph of reality. It's to be a useful map. The multi-story model gave us the basic geography of memory, the continents, the oceans, and that allowed later researchers to come in and start exploring, refining the map, and adding all the incredible detail we know today. It started the conversation and gave us a way to grab onto an abstract concept like memory and actually investigate it.
And all of this leaves us with a final, much bigger question. We've spent this whole time talking about memory as the system of boxes and arrows, like an information processor inside our heads. But our memories are so much more than that, aren't they? They're the very fabric of who we are. They're our identity. So as we keep building better and better models, the ultimate challenge is still out there. How does this seemingly mechanical process of storing data give rise to the richness of a human life? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.